Hi, and welcome to the Simple Worship Conversation. My name is Shannon Moore. I'm so happy today to have Addison Gardner, who is one of our assistant ministers here at the church. And you've never been on the program with me.
That is true. I have not.
So we had to remedy that.
We did.
And so Addison, in addition to being on staff here, is also a student at Bright Divinity School, working on your MDiv, preparing for a career in ministry and a life in ministry. And so as she was coming on today, I said, well, what would you like to talk about? What scripture is meaningful to you? And she said, I really want to talk about the 4th chapter of Judges. I said,
True.
well, okay, I think this is the first time we've used an Old Testament scripture on the morning program with
I'm
Shannon
honored.
Moore. So we may have done a psalm at one point, but I don't think so. I think this is our first time. And so you know the drill. We'll read the scripture. We'll talk about it for 10 minutes. And you said that you have a lot to say about this scripture.
When do I not have a lot to say?
And so to all of you Bible scholars out there, we apologize in advance for the mispronunciation of some of these words. We're going to do the best that we can. So just to give a little background before I read this scripture, between the time of Moses and Joshua in leadership of Israel, of the Israelites, and the kings, David and Solomon, there was this period of judges who would rise up and rule and help Israel in battle against their enemies. And Israel had this sort of very time of displeasing God and then getting back on track. And
Right.
the judges would help them get back on track. So one of those judges was a woman named Deborah. And so do you want to talk a little bit about her before we read the scripture, the context of...
Sure.
Yeah.
I think the important context to know about Deborah for this portion of Judges is that she, in this conversation, is talking to Barak about sending out and fighting these Jabins in Jabin's army, and that she is sending Barak out, and he says...
He was the king of Canaan, where they were
Yes.
trying to get the
Always
land
trying
and
to
all
fight, always consistently. Violence is very prevalent in the book of Judges. And Deborah sends Barak out, and he says, yeah, I'll go if you go with me. And it's in that moment that Deborah says, surely I will go with you, but Sisera, who is the general of the Jabin army, will fall at the hand of a woman. And so that's kind of strange that that's mentioned. Not always prophesied that idea.
And she was a prophet.
Right, yes, she was.
And so a little foreshadowing there. And so it happens. He takes his huge army out, they get defeated, and he runs away.
Sisera runs away,
Sisera,
yes.
the general, runs away, and that's where we pick up the story.
Indeed.
So I'll read it, and then we'll set our timer for 10 minutes, and we'll be good to go. So here we go. This is Judges chapter 4. I'm starting at the 17th verse. Now Sisera had fled away on foot to the tent of Jael, wife of Heber the Kenite, for there was peace between King Jabin of Hazor and the clan of Heber the Kenite. Jael came out to meet Sisera and said to him, turn aside, my lord, turn aside to me, have no fear. So he turned aside to her into the tent, and she covered him with a rug. Then he said to her, please give me a little water to drink, for I'm thirsty. So she opened a skin of milk and gave him a drink and covered him. He said to her, stand at the entrance of the tent, and if anybody comes and asks you, is anyone here, say no. But Jael, wife of Heber, took a tent peg and took a hammer in her hand and went softly to him and drove the peg into his temple until it went down into the ground. He was lying fast asleep from weariness, and he died. Then as Barak came in pursuit of Sisera, Jael went out to meet him and said to him, come, and I will show you the man whom you are seeking. So he went into her tent, and there was Sisera, lying dead, with the tent peg in his temple. And here ends the reading. I'm going to start the scripture. Tell me why you wanted to talk about this.
It's sad. I'm not condoning violence or stabbing people with tent pegs at all. It's just so
I'm glad to hear that.
Yes.
Just as we get started.
I actually got the chance to write an exegetical passage on this for my Hebrew Bible class at Bright. And it's just so interesting to me that there is such a detailed account of female violence, that this woman who is by herself, alone in a tent, her husband is away, is who takes this man's life, like is who ends this war. And the fact that it's noted, because so often there are trends in biblical text where we don't know how many women were doing things and were accomplishing things such as this, but their names were changed or the stories were left out. So the fact that Deborah and Jael are listed in such power places back to back is what initially attracted me to this kind of section of Judges.
Right. What I really like about the way Deborah is introduced a little earlier in the chapter is it's not a big deal,
right,
that she's a woman. It's not like now, in a very strange turn of events, we decide, it was decided that a woman would be in this position. It just is simply said that Deborah was a prophetess and was judging Israel.
Right.
Just like, no big deal. What does that speak to you? How does that speak to you as a woman in ministry?
I think, and I find this a lot in the Hebrew Bible compared to the New Testament, that there's so many situations like this, which of course they were doing that, like that's who they were, and they were doing what they were called to do. And I think finding passages like this is really important to me because in the New Testament there's so many examples of women, but they're only justified through men. So sure, Priscilla and Aquila were out there teaching, but it's because Paul said that they were allowed to. And there's, countless examples of, Mary, who is obviously important to our religion, but it's because she gave birth to the Christ. And the other Mary, who found Christ, who's also still a man, in case you didn't know. So there's a pattern of women who are glorified because of their association with men. But then there's women like Deborah and Jael who are not. And I don't know if I answered your question in saying that, but I think just having her name flat out, she was a prophetess, like that's kind of and I grew up in a church with a female minister, so I that was my upbringing was, she's a minister. Like,
right.
Of course she is. Like I had friends who came to my church, and I remember them being like, yeah, when's your minister coming up? And I was like, what? So for me, like this is kind of the way my brain works. Like, Deborah was a prophetess. Mm-hmm. So maybe that's why.
And a battle leader is coming to her for advice, for guidance, and wants her to come with him for more guidance. I can't do it without you, sort of.
Right.
We need your wisdom. We need your leadership. I love that too. Let's get over to Jael though. What is important about this story?
I think this story it just exemplifies her genius. This woman is smart. She, so again, a little background, their families got along. Heber the Kenite, her husband, had a peace treaty with Jabin's army and therefore with Sisera. And Jael, it says that she steps out of her tent to invite Sisera in. And from that moment, because she's a woman in biblical times who's left alone, that she's not assumed to be powerful. But that she's intentional with what she's doing. She is stepping out of her tent because she recognizes this man and who he is. And then, from then on, she gives him milk whenever he asks for a drink instead of just giving him water, because milk is known to make people sleepy. So she's like, oh yeah, I'm going to give this man milk because it's going to be calming and he's going to lay down. I'm going to cover him because making him warm is going to make him comfortable. She does all of the things a very hospitable, housewife would be expected to do. Mm-hmm. And so he feels no fear. She says she's going to guard the tent. She does all these things. And then it's just like the seamless, and then she takes the tent peg and then she stabs him and it's end scene. And obviously things happened in between those little moments, right? But I think...
Well, almost end scene. End scene is another man comes.
Right.
And she says, I've got who you're looking for. And that's what's funny to me. She says, I will show you the man whom you're seeking. So Is he thinking he's alive? That he's going to, be the one to capture him? Does he remember what Deborah said? That's very interesting to me, how all of that.
That's a great question. I haven't thought about. Yeah, I do not often put myself in the male shoes, so I haven't thought about that. But yeah, I do wonder. Maybe he thinks that she's got him like sitting in the tent, and he's gonna do it. But yeah, and then you see, and then it says, so he went into the tent, and there was Sisera lying dead, still with the tent peg in his temple.
Yeah. Not a pretty sight.
No.
So do you think this is where it gets a little antsy. So
Okay.
how did Jael, what prompted her to do that? Did God prompt her to do this?
That's a great question. That is one I did tackle in my exegetical work. And I think it's a question that leads to all the other questions, right? But I think when we look at certain passages and we see King David or King Solomon or any of the other kings that are asking and sending orders of mass murders and just war and violence in general, I think it's easier for people to say, well, yeah, he was sent by God. God said this needs to happen for this to happen, and you are chosen and they are not, and yada, yada, yada. And I think Christians and society at large have an easier time saying, like, yeah, they were sent by God to... But it's different when it's a personal, like, close-to-close encounter of woman with tent peg. Like, instead of king higher up sending armies, right? It's far removed. Whereas this moment is a situation where she made the choice and she ended a life. So you do have to wonder, did she do this because God was telling her to? And that I obviously don't have an answer to.
Right.
A correct one at least, but.
Well, and it's, as you said, it leads to all the other questions. We often question, where is God in XYZ of disaster and disease and illness and calamity, all of the why do bad things happen to good people. We always look for where God is in that. How do we put this into a context for Christians? How does this fit into our story as followers of Christ? Is there a way to reframe this? Is there a way to use it brings a little hope for our faith, or is it just is it of another time? What do you think?
I think it's interesting that you use the word reframe, because this is obviously a story where it's not a psalm, it's not a parable, there is no interpretation. It is, this happened at this time with these people. And I don't know that I would choose to try to find some kind of hidden meaning in it. Not saying that that's what you were suggesting at all.
Right. But that's the temptation a lot of times.
Right. Is to find a silver lining, or to find like what God was intending when this happened. However, guys, God didn't write the Bible. I don't know if people, is that safe to say? Like, there was no pen in God's hand. So I think whoever chose to include this and chose that this was important enough to be remembered in those times, I think you take from this that, bad things do happen. And sometimes they happen in the name of God. And who knows if this specific event was. And I think you also have to keep in mind your last bit there is 100% true, that this was a different time. That people did believe, they believed, so many things, that when it was raining, it's because they did this and because God is upset. Or when it's like, we need to kill so-and-so because God will be appeased by that. And so I think that's another thing. Context is extremely important, especially when you're looking at the Hebrew Bible, because it's so just literal. So, yeah.
Well.
So peaceful.
Right.
I need to do that for my alarm.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much. Very interesting text and great discussion. Thank you for bringing it to us and suggesting it. And It's always fun to talk to you, Addison. So
You too, Shannon.
I hope you have a great week, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.